Whether you're into unsolved mysteries, solved mysteries, or creating your own mysteries, Amazon Music's got millions of podcast episodes waiting. Just download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Hey everyone, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world, including this one, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. When we think of atrocities from World War II, we tend to picture the horrors committed by Nazi Germany. But there was another massacre just as deliberate and for decades just as denied. One that came not from Berlin, but from Moscow. It happened deep in a quiet Russian forest under the watch of Stalin's secret police. This is the story of the Katyn Forest Massacre, one of the darkest and most politically explosive crimes of the Second World War. A tragedy that shaped the fate of Poland and exposed the moral fault lines of the Allied world.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In the early spring of 1940, a convoy of Soviet trucks wound its way through the pine forests outside of Smolensk in western Russia. Inside were Polish prisoners, officers, professors, engineers, priests. They had been taken months earlier when the Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland. They thought they were being moved to a labor camp. Instead, they were being driven into the woods. Each man was led to a shallow pit. Hands bound behind his back, one by one, they were shot in the back of the head by Stalin's secret police, the NKVD. By May of that year, over 22,000 Polish military officers, policemen, and intellectuals had been executed across multiple sites: Katyn, Kalinin, and Kharkiv. Their bodies were dumped in mass graves. Their names disappeared from Soviet records, and for half a century, their murders were officially blamed on the wrong side. To understand Katyn, you have to understand Poland's nightmare at the start of World War II. In August of 1939, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, a secret agreement dividing Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany invaded Poland from the west on September 1st. 2 weeks later, the Red Army invaded from the east. Many people don't realize that Soviet Union was actually the aggressor when World War II started. It was only when Hitler invaded Russia that Stalin became Uncle Joe, and the so-called good guy, although that is obviously very questionable. Anyway, after the invasion of Poland, the country was split in two, swallowed whole by its powerful neighbors. Tens of thousands of Polish soldiers were captured by the Soviets, but these weren't ordinary soldiers. They were officers, doctors, judges, professors, and clergymen, in a sense, the brain and backbone of the entire Polish nation. To Stalin, they represented everything dangerous about an independent Poland: education, leadership, patriotism, and faith. And so in March of 1940, the Soviet Politburo made a decision. On March 5th, a document bearing Stalin's signature authorized the execution of all Polish prisoners in 3 NKVD camps. The justification was simple and chilling. These men were, and I quote, hardened and unrepentant enemies of Soviet power, end quote. What followed was methodical, an operation planned with bureaucratic precision. Each prisoner was processed, transported, and then murdered according to an assembly line system. Trucks carried the men under guard to secluded execution sites. At Katyn, the NKVD used pistols supplied by Germany, the Walther PPs and PPKs, for the reliability. Victims were forced to kneel, heads bowed, before being shot once at close range. Others were executed in cellars or woods, their bodies layered in pits covered with lime and soil. The killings continued day after day for weeks. When it was over, the NKVD had killed an entire generation of Polish leadership. As I mentioned earlier, roughly 22,000 people. It wasn't just a massacre, it was an attempt to erase the future of a nation. So, 3 years later, in 1943, German troops advancing through Russia stumbled upon the burial sites near Smolensk. The Germans saw an opportunity. They uncovered the mass graves and invited international observers, including the Red Cross, to inspect them. The evidence was overwhelming. Polish uniforms, letters, diaries, and coins, all dated to the spring of 1940, long before the Germans had ever occupied the region. The Germans publicized the discovery as Soviet barbarism, hoping to split the Allies and weaken Stalin's position as the new friend of the United States and Britain. The Soviet Union, in response, flatly denied responsibility, claiming that the killings had been committed by the Nazis in 1941. To back up their story, they staged fake investigations, produced fabricated reports, and launched propaganda campaigns accusing Germany. Caught in the middle was the Polish government in exile, based in London, which demanded an independent inquiry, even though they already knew the truth. The Soviets responded by actually severing all diplomatic ties with Poland's government in exile, and for the rest of the war and decades beyond, the lies stuck. The Soviets claimed that Poland was helping Germany in a propaganda war against the benevolent Soviet Union. And at that moment, the Western Allies faced an impossible moral dilemma. They knew, or strongly suspected, as various documents from the time point out, both on the American side and the British side, that the Soviet Union was responsible for Katyn. But in 1943, the war's outcome still hung in the balance. The Allies needed Stalin's armies to defeat Hitler. So President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill made a quiet, pragmatic choice. They said nothing. Churchill privately acknowledged that Soviet guilt was likely, but told his advisors, and I quote, "We shall have to live with it." End quote. Roosevelt avoided the issue entirely. Polish leaders were devastated. They had lost not just their officers, but their voice on the world stage. Their allies had chosen silence over truth. It was a silence that would last nearly 50 years. After the war, as Poland fell under Soviet control, Katyn became an unmentionable subject. In communist Poland, even speaking of it could lead to imprisonment. History textbooks blamed the Nazis. Monuments cited fascist murderers. Families of the victims lived in quiet grief, knowing the truth but forbidden to speak it out loud. In the West, the issue occasionally resurfaced, especially during the Cold War, but without conclusive Soviet acknowledgement, it remained politically radioactive. Only in 1990, after the fall of the Soviet Union, did the Russian government finally admit what the world had long suspected. The NKVD had in fact committed the Katyn Massacre on Stalin's orders. Declassified documents, the Katyn Papers, confirmed everything: names, dates, signatures, including Stalin's. The trail led directly to the highest level of Soviet leadership. The Katyn Forest Massacre wasn't just a crime. It was an act of national decapitation. Poland lost its officers, its teachers, its thinkers, you might say its soul. It crippled the country's ability to rebuild after the war and made it easier for Soviet communism to dominate Poland in the years that followed. For decades, the silence surrounding Katyn deepened the wound. Truth itself became a casualty, buried, denied, and manipulated. But when the truth finally emerged, it changed how history remembered the 20th century. Katyn stands as a warning, not just about the brutality of totalitarian regimes, but about the dangers of silence in the face of truth. Hopefully today's episode has inspired you to seek out and learn more about this subject. For answers to questions, sources for today's episode, to leave a comment, or check out upcoming guest announcements, visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts Podcast on Facebook and X. Stay curious, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.